the moonlight and her beauty overthrew me. I was overwhelmed, and I began to woo. I began to scheme to woo my wife, right? And so I'd just show up right next to her chair at every class. I just happened to be at lunch right next to her every day. And I would take her to every church service every weekend because romance, right? Go to church together. But one day she told me, I want to go on a bike ride. Perfect, I said. I'm the best bike rider ever. Said, and I have this map that I think can take us to my aunt's house. Easy. I've invented maps. Like, I can read a map upside down. Well, apparently, I read maps upside down. Because for the first hour, we were like holding hands and like shooting little hearts at each other and telling stories. After like 4 hours, she stopped talking to me. We stopped a dozen times. We took every wrong turn. And finally, she said, this is it. This is my aunt's house. I'm pretty sure like that's her house across the yard. Like, here we are. And I said, let me see the map. I said, no problem, you're right. If we go up here and take a left turn, we'll easily pull into the community. We can knock on the front door. It's perfect. So we turned left onto a busy highway. It's like 55 miles per hour. There's no edge to bicycle on. So we're like on the highway and cars are zooming past. After 30 minutes, we had to stop again. So I told us to go the wrong way. So I was wrong. You were right. We were in her backyard, so we turned around. On the way back, I fell off the highway. It was a loud bang crash. She didn't even turn around. She just kept going. So we got to her aunt's house 4 hours late, sweaty, exhausted, and she didn't complain. She didn't complain. She didn't bemoan. She didn't say anything ugly. She wasn't rude to me. She doesn't trust me to read maps for her still, but she wasn't rude to me. She didn't complain, and that meant a lot because I thought, listen, this is me at my very best. This is me on the day when I'm trying like I've never tried before. I'm trying with all that I have and all that I am to woo this woman, and I still got us 4 hours lost. I was like, can you imagine the volumes that she could fill every day of things to complain about if she wanted? But I'm also like fairly not terrible most of the time. I have some good things about me. And I was like, here's a woman who can appreciate that, who can focus on the good and put down all of those things worthy of complaints. So she will be the one. And there's something about complaining. It's our national pastime. We complain. It's the way we relate to each other. It's fun to complain. It feels good. You complain about the weather. You complain about football. You complain about politics. Complain about this current generation who are up to no good. We complain about everything. And it's good and fine and innocuous most of the time. But it can become a trap. It can become a default setting. It can become our way of life, that all we do is complain. It can become a lifestyle that consumes us, a habit that we can't break. And when we do that, our complaining begins to constrict us. It begins to draw us out of relationships. It begins to make us angry and bitter and filled with resentment. It begins to ruin the relationships we have with our friends and family, and it begins to pull us away from a relationship with God. Complaining, right, keeps us from the promised land. We see this in the story of the Israelites this morning. If you read the book of Exodus, the one thing that happens again and again and again is the Israelites again begin to murmur and complain. You see, the Israelites are suffering in Egypt. They're slaves, they're tortured and killed and abused. And this is not okay. And God is not satisfied with His people being subjugated in slavery. And so he reaches down, He rips apart the fabric of space-time and reaches into the world to rescue His people with a mighty arm on the night of the Passover. As the angel of death hovers over Egypt, the Israelites flee across dry land of the Red Sea. They know the power of God. They see the power of God and they know God is leading them. But after a few days, they begin to murmur and complain. What? Have you led us to the desert? Were there not enough graves in Egypt that we should die here, hungry and alone? So God rains down manna from heaven. Imagine you wake up in abundance of everything you need for the day, everything you need for sustenance and life God has given. And they say, well, how about a little meat? So God sends ravens in abundance. And they say, well, it'd be really nice to wash it down with something. And so today in the story we read, that God produces water from the rocks. And it's not a trickle of water, it's a gushing river, right? Moses strikes the rock and a river ushers forth enough to provide for the entire nation of Israel. For 40 years wandering through the desert, and they're drinking from this wonderful river of life that's even there, they say, to this day when it was written. And yet the people continue to murmur and complain, even when Moses is in the very presence of God. He's standing on the mountain in the cloud with God himself, receiving the Ten Commandments. They turn to Aaron and say, but where is God now? Well, what has God done for us lately? Make for us a golden calf that we can worship him here and now, on our time, in our way. And finally, it's too much. The complaining has constricted their hearts and pulled them away so far that they can't live in a relationship with God, that they can't see God moving again and again in the relationship. So they doubt God and they doubt God's provision, and not a single one from that generation will enter the promised land, not even Moses himself. That they go to the very doorstep, and not until every single person has died will their children and grandchildren enter in. Because that's what complaining does. It pulls us away. It keeps us from the fullest grace that God has in store for us. We can get into the cycle as well. But being a Christian doesn't happen by default. You don't wake up and you say, well, I'm a Christian today, or my parents were Christian, or I was baptized or confirmed. No, Christianity is a choice that we make every day and every hour. It's an exercise, an art form. It's a muscle that we have to work out routinely. We have to try it. You don't wake up grateful every day. You got to try to be grateful. You got to fake it till you make it, right? You got to practice these things to turn it around. We believe our words matter. We believe the Word was spoken into flesh in Jesus Christ. And our words are spoken into our flesh. The way we use our words matter. The way we speak creates our worldview. It creates our reality. And if we look at the world through the eyes of complaining, at the eyes of anger and resentment, then our worldview becomes darker and we turn our backs on God, on the goodness that He has in store for us. So what do? We turn it around. Here are 3 things I do every day. 3 things that I practice actively that I have to be intentional about, that I try, and it's part of my lifestyle. First, you got to turn that frown upside down. Anytime I want to say something negative, I make it a positive, right? When I'm talking to my daughter, I don't say, don't run. I say, hey, let's walk fast. Don't leave this table. I say, why don't we sit for a few more minutes? Don't yell. I say, let's talk quietly, because it's an inside voice. Right? In the same way in a sermon, where if I'm going to say something negative, like don't be proud, I want to say be humble. How can we make this into a positive? How can we turn our whole language and our whole attitude towards a positive outlook? Number 2, we have to practice affirmation. Every hour, every day, every person, we have to try. Hey, it was so good of you to come and sign checks in the middle of the week when you're busy and you don't have to. Marshall, it was so great that you would come yesterday. That's really nice. It meant a lot to me. Right? It feels good to be affirmed. Ashley, killed it with the reading today. Killed it. It feels good to be affirmed. Right? You can change someone's day and you can change your day. We lift each other up. That's our role for each other. We're supposed to carry each other. When God says, love your neighbor as yourself, what that means is go out and be nice to him. Let's not complain about each other because we have endless room to do that. Let's lift one another up. Let's use our words to be the gospel. And finally, be the change. We know that Gandhi quote, be the change you would like to see in the world. Be the change. If there's something not right and you have the power and the ability to do something about it, do it. If you don't like politics, then go vote. If you don't like the dishes laying in the sink, then do the dishes. Right? If you see something happening and you can do it, change it, because there ain't no hands but your hands. There ain't no feet but your feet. So let's get up. We waste time and it's idle to sit in this death spiral of complaining. Let's do it. Let's be active, because Christ is alive and we have breath within us. My buddy Jonathan was giving me a hard time the other day. He said, every time I call this church to complain, I end up with another job. That's it. Call. Give us your complaints. I dare you. Because every once in a while, even we can get into this cycle at church. It's been known, not at this church, not here, but at other churches, it's been known that people can complain. We can complain about the building, right? Why aren't we bigger? Why aren't we larger? Or we can complain about the liturgy. Why don't we chant everything, even the sermon? Why isn't there more chanting? We complain about the preacher. We've already discussed this. Volumes could be written every day about all the things we can complain about the preacher. We can do that, but that constricts the power of God. That inhibits God's Spirit from actively working among us. And we have to fight against it. We have to liberate God. We have to let the Spirit pour into our hearts and fill us. Because what if you walk into a church where people are lifting each other up, celebrating one another, a church where people are volunteering. There's not enough acolytes, then I will be an acolyte. There's not enough people cleaning, then I will clean. We are that church. And what's that kind of experience to walk in where you hear gratitude on everyone's lips, where you hear the praise? We say in our service that we don't come empty-handed. At the moment of the Eucharist, we say we come. We come with praise and thanksgiving. That's our gift to God. Gratitude is our gift to God. We don't say we come with resentment and anger. No, we come with praise and thanksgiving. That the very nature of God is love. And for us to be in that relationship, we have to celebrate it. Because, my friends, when we do this, we don't just make a happier place. We don't just make a better life. We don't just make a happier family. When we celebrate with gratitude every day in every way, with every word, then we can walk into the promised land. We can walk in with our heads held high. We can walk in celebrating and rejoicing because God is alive. Amen.